In today's video, we investigate the origins and legacy of the Disciples of the Red Redemption, a regiment of renown for Warhammer Fantasy 2nd Edition. Well, hello and welcome to another Oldhammer retrospective where we look at some cool retro minis from the days of yore. So let me begin by saying this: no matter what the game, I love fielding cultists. They're usually cheap, plentiful, and expendable. Plus, they're highly motivated and certifiably nuts, so it is perfectly acceptable to have them ignore self-preservation and charge screaming into gunfire. And when terrible things inevitably happen to them, it's really not that tragic. They just got the violent end they were looking for. So with that in mind, here are a few rather ancient cultist minis from Citadel Miniatures. These happy little fellows are disciples of the Red Redemption, which was one of the regiments of renown for Warhammer 2nd Edition way back in 1985. Not to be confused with the Red Dead Redemption video games. So there were quite a few regiments of renown back in the day, including Dwarf Warriors, Goblin Guard, Eastern Fanatics, Lizardmen, Gargoyles, Hobgoblins, and Chaos Monks, which I guess is another name for the Disciples of the Red Redemption. I've also seen them labeled as Dark Disciples in some of the later hardshell blister packages. As you can see, the Disciples of the Red Redemption are pretty small compared to some of the later Citadel/GW figures. The minis on these small square bases are regular Disciples, and the center mini on the large round base is a leader or officer, depending on what catalog you're looking at. There was also a standard bearer, a musician, and a champion, which I do not have, and we'll talk a bit more about those sculpts later. So the origins of the Red Redemption actually predate Warhammer Fantasy by a few years. The Red Redemption movement, if you can call it that, is referenced in 1980's Laserburn sci-fi combat rules written by Brian Ansel, who among other things was a founder of Citadel Miniatures, co-author of Warhammer 1st Edition, and eventually managing director of Games Workshop. Laserburn is considered to be the spiritual predecessor to Warhammer 40k, featuring equipment such as bolt rifles and dreadnought armor, and also includes its own reference to a Red Redemption in the game's history and background section. In Laserburn lore, the greatest threat to Earth and its rulers, the High Lords of the Imperium, are the independent dark worlds on the fringes of Imperial space, from which has sprung a new religion known as the Red Redemption. The movement is directed by the zealous brothers and masters of the Inner Circle, rabid fanatics who have had the flesh flayed from their bodies and replaced with metal carapace. The text in this section of the book is actually pretty inflammatory, so I won't go into it in more detail. But I will say that you can purchase both Laserburn reprints and original Laserburn 15mm figures from the Alternative Armies web store. For example, you can get 20 Redemptionist figures for about £10, which is pretty darn reasonable. So here's the autumn 1985 issue of the Citadel Journal, which was both a hobby guide and a showcase for Citadel products. In that issue, we get lore and stats for playing the Disciples of the Red Redemption in Warhammer Fantasy 2nd Edition. The article reveals that the Warhammer Red Redemption was founded by a fellow named Erroneous Balbadron, a warrior priest of the Brotherhood fighting a holy war with other men of the West against the Arabians of Arabia. Long story short, during the Crusade, the Brotherhood captures an ancient Arabian temple in which Erroneous finds a curious book, which turns out to be the Scripture of Khorne, Dark Lord of Slaughter. After reading the tome, Erroneous mutilates his own face, dons a searing hot iron mask from the temple, and proceeds to murder all of his comrades in, quote, a chaotic, commando-style exercise of carnage. He then escapes into the desert to spread his message of redemption through blood and slaughter. Coincidentally, Erroneous' cousin, Cronus Goodheart, has the misfortune of discovering the temple crime scene. You can see him there on the right. Goodheart is so distraught by the carnage that he and his companions form the Avenging Knights of the Cleansing Flame, vowing to hunt down Erroneous and purge any other minions of chaos they discover along the way. Okay, here is a look at 4 regiments of renown showcased in the autumn 1985 Citadel Compendium, though there were many more than this. I actually have that Ogre regiment at the top somewhere around here, though I remember buying it in a hard case blister pack around 1989 and not in the full-color Regiments of Renown packaging that Citadel was using earlier. Here are the Disciples, and just below them the Knights of the Cleansing Flame. On the top row you can see the Red Redemption Standard Bearer, Champion, and Drummer, which I do not have. And here is another shot of the Red Redemptionists, this one from the 1988 Citadel Miniatures catalog. These versions have been designed for Slotta bases, but I'm not sure that the earlier versions were. Okay, so moving on. Warhammer Fantasy 3rd Edition was released in 1987, followed by Realm of Chaos, Slaves to Darkness in 1988, which contained rules for both Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40k. The Disciples of the Red Redemption don't get any stats in Warhammer Fantasy 3rd Edition, but there is a brief mention of Chaos Cultists. The rulebook says that cultists are an essential part of Warhammer's background, but their role is not directly relevant to mass combat, and they are unlikely to appear on the battlefield. However, it says a group of cultists could conceivably form a fighting unit, in which case they have normal human profiles with D6-4 dominant attributes. I think I've read that the cultists play a much larger role in the Warhammer Fantasy RPGs and the novels, which would make sense. There are no Disciples of the Red Redemption in 1988's Realm of Chaos, Slaves to Darkness either. In that book, Chaos Thugs are the lowest tier of human Chaos minions. However, in the second Realm of Chaos book, The Lost and the Damned, there are Chaos Cultist stats for Warhammer 40k, though not Warhammer Fantasy. Redemptionists do, however, appear in the 1996 Outlanders book for Necromunda 1st Edition. However, now, instead of being minions of Chaos, Redemptionists have morphed into an extreme offshoot of the Imperial cult, worshipping the Emperor as a divine being and seeking to purge the galaxy of mutants, heretics, and sinners of all persuasions. In fact, they are so zealous and violent in pursuing their goals, Redemptionist Crusaders have been branded outlaws by the authorities, meaning, among other things, that they have a bounty on their pointy heads. So here's something I didn't realize until just recently. There is a disciple of the Red Redemption hiding amongst these classic Necromunda Redemptionists. So in the center here, we have an original Red Redemption leader on the right, and to his left is the same model reimagined and converted for Necromunda. Someone converted him by adding a shotgun, so that's pretty cool. And finally, before we wrap things up, I would be remiss if I didn't mention one more faction in GW's Pointy Hat Cult contingent. That, of course, is Mordheim's Cult of the Possessed, where the Cult Brethren get the pointy hats, and the Dark Souls wear metal face masks somewhat reminiscent of the original Chaos Cultists, the Disciples of the Red Redemption from 15 years earlier. Alright, that is a wrap on today's look at the Disciples of the Red Redemption, a Warhammer Fantasy Regiment of Renown, going all the way back to 1985. If you have any insight or thoughts on these vintage Disciples of Chaos, please leave a comment. Let's keep the conversation going. We shall return shortly with some more gaming-related content, but thank you very much for checking out this video. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.